Welcome back to the final half day of the 8th Cohesion Forum. This morning, we focused on the green dimension of the twin transition, but we heard how inextricably linked those two dimensions, the green and the digital, are. And so in this session, we're going to focus on the innovation, divide, and digitalization to enhance real long-term convergence. We heard yesterday that COVID-19 has accelerated the digital transformation, but it's also highlighted the urgent need to tackle key issues to enable that transformation. To borrow from the phrase used by Commissioner Ferreira, this is an area where she urged us to mind the gaps. There are gaps that need to be addressed. And we're going to discuss here the role of digital innovation as a key enabler of wider innovation in our economies and societies, its significance for growth of regions, for their competitiveness, and for their development. But we're also going to discuss the fact that, as with the green transition, there are huge opportunities from the digital revolution, but also some risks. Risks that those opportunities won't be spread evenly and that we could create new inequalities and new disparities. We need to discuss the role of cohesion policy in seeing how we can best support regions during this digital decade and how we can help to narrow the innovation divide, but also ensure we do not create a new digital divide. Delighted to welcome, the Commissioner couldn't be with us, I'll come back to her in a moment, she has sent us a message, but let me introduce the rest of our panel. Delighted to welcome Liliana Pavlova, Vice-President of the European Investment Bank. We have with us Manuel Heitor, Minister for Science, Technology and Higher Education in Portugal. Andres Sut, Minister of Entrepreneurship and Information Technology in Estonia. We have joining us remotely Andrew Wyckoff, Director for Science, Technology and Innovation at the OECD. Welcome to you remotely, Andrew. And last but very much not least, Dario, who is CEO and founder of O'Clock. He was a company finalist in the Regio Stars Award 2020 edition, category Skills and Education for Digital Europe. I'm going to let him tell you what O'Clock is, but we're great to have you with us for a very practical, on-the-ground experience of what we're talking about. As in our previous session, I've invited our panel to make fairly brief opening remarks, then we'll have an interactive discussion. Just a reminder, if you have a question or comment, if you're here in the room, you can do it the old-fashioned way and raise your hands, or if you prefer, you're a little bit shy, you prefer to write it, or if you are watching us online, please go to slido.com, put in the hashtag Cohesion Forum. Please, if you can, give me your name and organization so I know where you're coming from, and please be as brief as possible. So, as I mentioned, Maria Gabriel, the European Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth, couldn't be with us this afternoon, but she did want to address you, so she sent us this video. Let's hear what she has to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start by thanking Commissioner Ferreira, dear Elisa, and the organizers of this forum for giving me the opportunity to address you today about the innovation cohesion and its role to ensure long-term convergence of European regions. Why is this topic so important? As the 80th Cohesion Report points out, a number of regions have been catching up in terms of economic output. It is a very positive sign that we can achieve cohesion. However, disparities still exist, especially when it comes to the performance in terms of research and innovation. Data show that research and innovation expenditure in the EU is highest in the northwestern regions and an average of 2.7% of GDP in 2019. It is lower in eastern and southern regions, respectively 1.3% and 1.4%. How can we tackle this divide? First, the recovery and resilience plans are an important opportunity to boost research and innovation expenditure in those regions. I'm proud to see that these plans are ambitious in terms of research, innovation and digitalization, targeting significant investments in infrastructure and cooperation between research and business. Second, we need to develop effective synergies between our programs. On these, the provisions of Horizon Europe and the cohesion policy regulations provide legal certainty. They offer the possibility for a region to transfer up to 5% of its European Regional and Development Funds allocation to Horizon Europe. It is a good opportunity to invest to better research infrastructure, for example. Additionally, we have tripled the budget for widening measures in Horizon Europe to reach 3 billion euros. And we'll continue our efforts by adding additional measures. For instance, teaming, twinning will be fine-tuned and will give a more important role to the national contact points. Third, an environment conducive to innovation and people, well equipped with digital skills and knowledge, are key for Europe and for its regions to best seize the opportunities offered by the digital transition. And I would like to mention here the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. Bringing together more than 3,000 partners, the EIT and its knowledge and innovation communities work in areas such as climate, digitalization, efficient and renewable energies, sustainable raw materials, health and food. Moreover, by enhancing the cooperation of regional and local actors, startups, research institutions, its regional innovation scheme helps support local innovation enablers where they can make the biggest difference to enhancing innovation and cohesion. On this, through a series of meetings, I have been consulting stakeholders such as an ecosystem leaders or unicorns to take up bottom-up solutions adaptable in European regions. In this regard, I'm working on the European Innovation Agenda, one of the primary goals of which is to create a pan-European innovation ecosystem where all innovation actors, universities, businesses, industries, and research institutes work together to bring novel solutions and innovative technologies. Furthermore, under the European Research Area Forum for Transition will provide a platform for assisting member states and regions in implementing existing policy tools as well as stimulating cooperation. This will foster learning by doing and the exchange of good practices between regions. Finally, as we are currently celebrating the European Year of Youth, education must be part of the solution. The Digital Education Action Plan supports regions by setting out a series of actions to boost the basic and advanced digital skills of citizens. The European Strategy for Universities will employ measures supporting higher education institutions to spur their potential as facilitators of innovation ecosystems. I would like to conclude by saying that we still have to increase our efforts. The last years have seen many opportunities emerge with the joint action plan with the Committee of the Regions on research, innovation and education. However, there is more that we can do, and I call on you to encourage the uptake of bottom-up ideas. It is only by including regional and local actors that will ensure convergence. Thank you.
So, Commissioner Gabriel, they're highlighting that innovation divide and how she believes EU programs and funds can help to bridge it. She emphasized two things when talking about that have come up time and again in our conversations, and that was the issue of synergies, the links between cohesion policy funding and Horizon Europe funding. She talked also about those partnerships, that working together, and an issue that we haven't focused on so far, but has come up in most of our sessions, that of skills, reskilling, upskilling. So lots to talk about a little bit later on, but I'd like to give the floor now to Liliana Pavlova, who, as I mentioned earlier, is Vice President of the European Investment Bank, for your opening thoughts. Over to you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear fellow speakers, ministers, representatives of the business, colleagues. First of all, I would like to say that I'm really glad to be here today, restarting our meetings in person. It's really encouraging, and I think this is only also an opportunity to have more bilateral exchanges, more informal exchanges, which we were missing for quite a period. But as you said, and as everyone is saying, Of course, COVID pandemic also accelerated the digital transformation and our ability to meet and to have events in a hybrid format. And I think this is something on which we will be continuously working and having. And definitely the pandemic not only accelerated the digital transformation, but also now it's not anymore nice to have or wish as a good wish. But now digital transformation and investment in digital skills is a must. It's a need, there is a demand, there is a need, and we all have to make sure that we unite our efforts, we create and we rely on the synergies which are needed between different instruments, between public authorities and local authorities, financial institutions, governments, businesses, really to find the best way on how we move forward. And I'm glad to say that the European Investment Bank, as the EU bank and the largest multilateral financial institution, is one of the key financiers in digitalization for many years now. So, and of course, as such, we are also one of the main contributors to cohesion policy objectives. Because back in 1955, when the bank was established, the main purpose of its creation was indeed financing convergence and cohesion. As of today, as we always say, the cohesion is in the DNA of the bank. Of course, throughout the years, with the different challenges in reality, we transformed ourselves as well into the EU Climate Bank. But here I should say that climate and transformation, cohesion investment, so these are the two transversal objectives on which we are focusing our efforts. And we could be successful there only if they complement to each other, only if we have ensured synergies, because climate and cohesion are reinforcing each other objectives. So I'm very glad as Vice President in charge of cohesion policy investments of the bank that we recently our board adopted our new cohesion strategies, so-called cohesion orientation paper, where we clearly state what are how our investments, our financial support will complement different financial instruments and objectives, how we can be more impactful, and what are the new approaches in a more flexible way which we are going to deliver with in our financing. We are expanding and extending our eligibilities on how we are going to finance different sectors, and definitely green and digital transitions are key enablers for the success on the implementation of cohesion objectives. And something important to mention, we have increased our ambition and our annual targets of financing. So our plan is this year by something 40+%, but our ambitious goal is to reach 45% of overall funding of the bank, which is approximately 70 billion per year, to be dedicated to cohesion and cohesion-related objectives. And something also very important to mention, less developed regions who are fortunately still lagging behind also in terms of digitalization, digital transformation, they deserve to receive special attention and more, as we call it, tailor-made financing and advisory support in order to catch up. So here we have set so-called sub-target. So 23% of our investments should be directed to less developed regions. And this is, although it is sounds very ambitious goal, I strongly believe it is a realistic one, because this is the only way to maximize our additionality, I should say, because definitely there is clearly underinvestment in less developed regions, also in rural areas, which contribute to what we call today, and this is a special element of the discussion of our session, digital divide.
Absolutely. Lots to come back to about how best to use that money, where the investment should be focused, and so on in our discussion. But thank you for now. Manuel Reiter, Minister for Science, Technology, Higher Education in Portugal. Your opening thoughts on the importance of this issue that we're discussing and how you see things.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and certainly Commissioner Elisa Ferreira for the invitation for being here. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge these 8 cohesion reports, and I believe for all of us, European citizens, should be proud of the results, particularly when we follow this path since the very first reports. Europe has changed, and that should make us proud of that, but also make us with the necessary energy to do more and better. And I have one argument, essentially based on this report, which is the absolute need to better articulate and integrate cohesion investments with competitiveness investments towards convergence, and this can only be done through a knowledge approach, particularly based on the strengthening the triangulation between research, innovation, and education. So this is not just a commonplace. Bringing together cohesion, competitiveness, convergence, and knowledge means to center the approach in a people-centered, innovation-driven approach, which can only be done by looking better at a transdisciplinary approach to our collective behaviors and what I will call human agency. People, people, people. There are many interesting issues in this report. I will call you to one figure, page 34, about firm dynamics. You see that it is in Portugal and in Estonia where there are the largest growth rate of high-value firms. Actually, Portugal and Estonia have these days the highest European concentration of unicorns. And that, again, is a change which, again, should make proud of the last 20 years of evolution, but now requires new instruments, particularly better articulating cohesion and competitiveness towards convergence. Because, as actually Carlota Perry so well introduced this morning, if you have in large capital cities the coexistence of poverty, we have also need to strengthen more and more innovation-driven activities in other non-capital cities, in non-capital regions. And therefore, this articulation of instruments will be critical and have at least three implications. In the traditional way, funds like the European Social Fund or FEDER for regional development and have been used, particularly to strengthen advanced education, the employment of skilled human resources, and more to better understand the role of R&D and research and innovation across the full value chain. For example, the traditional way, either DG RTD or DG Regio, look at the so-called technology readiness level to separate different types of research activities in applied or fundamental, does not exist anymore. Actually, if we have unicorns these days, or if you would, through the COVID, we were able to develop vaccines, was the strong interaction between fundamental research and disruptive innovation, particularly through startups. And therefore, looking at a people-centered approach, innovation-driven, will require the evolution of our instruments through one way where we can really apply a people-centered approach towards convergence. These have strong implications, particularly also to better coordinate instruments like Horizon Europe, the European Social Funds, and FEDER. And there are good practices in Europe. Probably the high-performance computing, the joint undertaking on Euro HPC, has become one of the most interesting stories over the last 5 years in Europe to better build synergies between European centralized funds, European regional funds like FEDER, municipalities funds, and national funds.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to come back on that in our discussion and what we learn from where it's working well for applying to the future. You mentioned Estonia there, another star in the firmament here. So I'm delighted now to give the floor to Andres Sut, a Minister of Entrepreneurship and Information Technology.
Thank you, Jackie, and my pleasure to be here. 4 quick points, if I may. The first is on cohesion. If we turn clock backwards, Estonia, by 20 years, when we became a member, or a little bit less than 20 years, became a member of EU, we had GDP per capita less than 60% of the EU average. Today, we are up from 85, so further up. Not yet 100 yet, but getting there. So if I go further back to late 1980s, early 90s, when the Iron Curtain fell, the contrast is even starker, positively for us. So great to be in a big European family. My second point relates to a changed playing field. With Russia's war in Ukraine, the Iron Curtain is back. It is another great accelerator on top of COVID, what we already had. So what we see is a fundamental repositioning and relocation of supply and value chain. And here, I think, is a lot what Europe can and should gain in terms of reducing strategic dependencies, in terms of investing in innovation and digitalization and the green transition, all go hand in hand. And this is where we really need to excel, because in order to get back to a world and values we need to regain technological superiority. That takes time and investment, and this is why we have institutions in place. Now, second point, or a third point actually, relates to the digital single market. We have benefited a lot in Estonia from digitalizing everything in public services. But if we look at the EU digital single market, we have only one EU-wide use case. And that is what? COVID certificate, which fortunately is not mandatory any longer in most of the places. But it is a great example of the value what it brings if we can create use cases what are usable across the borders for all 40 million plus people. This is what we need more, practical use cases. Then we can talk about digital single market. Manuel mentioned already startups, so I only, just maybe one number or two numbers actually. Back in 21, Estonian startups raised a little bit shy of 1 billion euros. And that's a country of 1.3 million population. First quarter, 22, a little bit shy of 900 million. So 3 quarters still to go. Very, very vibrant and dynamic society and ecosystem, but very important for a digitalization. Now, on a digital divide, I think what we also need, and this is sort of a legacy of a COVID, I would say positive legacy, is availability of high-speed internet in any corner of a country. Because this is where the biggest opportunity lies for a better quality of life, for being more environmentally friendly with a lower carbon footprint, and better, so many positive things. And now my last fourth point, the more we become digital, the more we become susceptible of a cyber attacks. So we need to invest hand in hand into digitalization and into cybersecurity. We need a common methodology, how we measure investments into cybersecurity, and we need a proper benchmark. Say maybe 10, 15, 20%, well 20 is probably a bit high end of the IT budget. So then we can be safer, because the cyberspace has become increasingly more unfriendly. This is where we shouldn't really walk away. Quite opposite, we should penetrate even stronger, but for that we need very, very sound and resilient cyber capability.
Thank you.
I stop here.
Thank you very much. Lots to come back to later on. Let me go remote, if I can put it that way now, to Andrew Wyckoff, who, as I said earlier, Director for Science, Technology and Innovation at the OECD. Andrew, welcome. Great to have you with us, albeit virtually. Your opening thoughts, please.
Thank you, Jackie, and my regards to the panel. And I apologize I'm not there in person. I would have loved to have been there, but there are a lot of pressing demands, as everyone knows, including on the OECD here in Paris, France. I'm not telling the audience that anything they don't already know if I say that digitalization is clearly the technology hallmark of our era, and applications of these, like artificial intelligence, will be the general purpose technology going forward. And as Manuel said correctly, the competitiveness and well-being of regions and areas will be dependent upon these. It's been said, yeah, the COVID pandemic, we saw another step up in the acceleration of digitalization. I expect this will happen again with the twin transitions as we begin to deploy digital technologies in a clever way to help us address climate change. But policymaking, as we all know, doesn't really keep up with the technology. And this has really been the theme of our work at the OECD since 2017, when we've had a project that's involved most of the OECD called the Going Digital project. And I just think it's testament that every technology brings with it huge opportunities and some challenges, and those are apparent here at the Cohesion Forum today. Just let me start off with a little bit of optimism. The prices for these technologies continues to decline year on year on year. We've seen computing power just go through the roof. I carry a supercomputer in my pocket now. That's just unbelievable, and it's testament to the innovation that's occurred. And so while we still face digital divides, I'm incredibly impressed by the diffusion that has occurred. It's just that the bar keeps rising on what we call connectivity and digital engagement. I'm also optimistic, and I want to call out to Ukraine. The minister, Fedorov, the digital minister, has shown the world the power of digital natives and what they can do with very simple technology to enable a whole population and to get their story out. Likewise, digital technology allows connectivity, and with that comes cohesion. And it's been great at what I would call serendipitous innovation. Everyone can be an innovator in this area. But let me quickly just shift to the challenges. And I think these are challenges for cohesion of any region. The production function for digital economy is much different than it was in the 20th century. It puts a premium on what we call intangibles. We've talked about these already, R&D, skills, things like intellectual property, but particularly data and software. And these have properties where once you master a piece of software, it takes a lot of fixed costs to make a good piece of software, but very low marginal cost to deploy it. So it's what we call scale without mass, but this means the value becomes concentrated in a particular handful of firms or in a particular region, and with that comes challenges to diffusion. Let me just say, it's not all about the development of these technologies, it's about the effective use, and with that comes productivity gains, which enable well-being to go up. And to me, that's where we concentrate on issues like skills and diffusion and lowering the barriers as important enablers for making that happen.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. And as you say, it's that crucial issue of the take-up, not just the development of them. And question there, how can cohesion policy help to boost that take-up? Let us complete the picture. Let's go to the front line of working on these areas. And we've talked a lot about skills already in this session. So it's a perfect moment to hand to Dario Spagnola, who, as I said, is CEO and founder of O'Clock. He'll tell you all about it. Dario, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I'm really happy to be here and share this field experience I have. So just a little bit of context. So I co-founded O'Clock 5 years ago. O'Clock is the first organization in France to offer full-time distance vocational training in the digital sector. So we train for digital jobs completely remotely. And our courses are aimed at unemployed people, people with disadvantages such as disabilities, or they live far away from physical vocational training centers, or people with other forms of exclusions such as social phobia or other things like this. It's a very wide field. We train more than 1,000 people every year with an employment integration rate of 70%. And so we were finalists of the Regio Stars 2020, and I'm very happy about this. And I think if we made it this far, it's because we were able to prove that with the right methodology and with the right technology, full online distance training can be immensely powerful to boost employability, even to unskilled people or people with low levels of education. So just to go back a little bit further, I was born in 1983, and when in 1990 I was 7 years old, I was gifted with my first personal computer, which, needless to say, I grew to be very fond of. And by the year 2000, I was being a school dropout myself, and I was observing the digital transformation, the digital revolution. And I was seeing three forces at play. First, the front run of the digital transition by visionaries, people and companies. Fine. And second force, the struggle to understand it and benefit from it from many different people and organizations. And the third force at play was the resistance, the holding back, people and organizations fearing to be disrupted from it. And here we are now, more than 20 years later in Brussels, acknowledging this powerful link that exists between digital transformation and cohesion, and trying to find new ways to leverage it to the real long-term convergence. Yet, what I'm seeing is kind of the same forces at play. And maybe this is because there are things we fear, there are challenges, and may I outline very quickly three of them. The first is what full distance training means. I think we all acknowledge that some form of distance training is powerful, is a positive for society, but full time, what we experienced during the COVID crisis, this is not good, right? It can weaken the social link between people. Full remote working. We have very personal first-hand experiences with this. So most people like some remote working, but what about full-time remote working? Maybe it can harm companies, maybe it can harm the workplace. And finally, digital infrastructure, as it was already said, it's obvious that we need very high-speed internet connection to every household, but it's almost impossible to imagine that in the short term, we will manage to bring the fiber optics cable to every place that we need it. So we must open ourselves to alternative technologies. And when people say 5G, there's some fear that comes with it. So my final thought is that, you guessed it, my field experience is strongly in favor of these changes, even though they can be fearful. And my hope is that European policies can front-run these changes, can help those who struggle with them, and certainly not be the ones who hold back and resist. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dario. And that question of how we help those who are fearful or who need more help, how we avoid a digital divide, I'd like to come back to. So we've heard here how important, why digitalization matters for its own sake, but also as a key enabler of innovation in so many areas. And one of you said earlier, it's not just a nice to have, it is a must have. I wanted to come back and perhaps a thought from our two ministers first. You, as I say, coming from countries, and Minister Hayter said it earlier, that are doing well, that have some of these stars. But we see and we've heard, and Liliana talked about the least developed countries, and we'll come back on them, but we also heard from the Commissioner yesterday about some middle-income regions that are caught in what she called the development trap. They're stagnating, and they're stagnating, it seems, mainly because of poor innovation performance. And I'm wondering what you think we need to do to ensure that this great digital revolution and its use as an enabler, we don't create a new divide, that we help. What do you think, Minister Soet and then Minister Hayter, what do you think can be done to bring more regions up to the level of, what are the implications for cohesion policy, for true convergence in this area?
I think first is for a government not to stand on a way for business and innovation. We really need to give this freedom for businesses to innovate and to grow. Now, I think the second, and this is I think what Manuel already mentioned, is education. Starting from really young children in the kindergarten and onwards, that being friends with digital is okay. Because otherwise it will be very, very, very difficult. And then I think it's all the enabling technologies. Being open for a change, and I think actually being open and adaptive for the speed of change. If we look back past 25 years, it has been the fastest in the last 100 years in terms of technological adoption, in terms of the speed of a change. Some people say that the next 10 years will be even faster. So we need to really be mindful and ready for this, and it's not going to be incremental. It's going to be disruptive in terms of technologies if we move away from fossil fuels to electric and renewables. So all these kind of things, instead of owning, sharing, and I think it will be really for building this bridge also between the generations, that people will not feel left behind. And this is where I think...
So in tackling the digital divide, we tackle the innovation divide automatically, because many of the issues you talked about relate to that digital divide. Minister Hayter.
Thank you very much, and following Andrew's, I will focus particularly to understand, in this report is very clear, what means innovation in real places. Actually, recent scholar work clearly show that we cannot frame our divide in a single model. Actually, there are different ways to innovate. For instance, if you look at in the northeastern part or western part of Portugal in Minho, and in the southern of Italy in Bari, is completely different from what you can find in the middle of Amsterdam. And understanding what I will call the collective behaviors of each specific zone will give us the opportunity particularly to understand innovation paths which are different from each other, but always depend on the densification of human resources and the institutional context to employ skilled people. And this gives me to three observations, actually following Carlota Perry's early today. First, in the area of the digital networks, we are observing a great revolution. Over the last 25 years, we have observed so-called Web 2 era with the concentration in large companies. America and Europe lost that process. But now we are moving towards Web 3.0, particularly based on decentralized digital networks. And although most of the debate has been concentrated on cryptocurrencies, started with Bitcoin and the Ethereum and now Ocean and other platforms, these, together with AI-enabled innovations will dramatically change the way we will build digitalization in the coming 10 years. And this is a new opportunity for Europe if we are able to speed up the regulatory context, particularly in a way which I will say needs to give emphasis to digital humanism in the way where in Europe understands the human agency at large. The second issue is the great opportunities, as already mentioned earlier today, about the collective responsibility of decarbonization and therefore green transition. Actually, as Andy has shown in the OECD in the last years, this will depend on new knowledge, on institutional innovation, as Carlota Perez mentioned today, and new observation methods. And Europe as the infrastructure to really move faster in the decarbonization, and this is a new opportunity. Last but not least, actually a number of European scholars and American scholars very recently has published a paper on the proceedings of National Academy of Sciences calling for a crisis discipline they call collective behaviors. And in Europe, again, we do understand the key idea to put people first, and therefore we have the opportunity to really understand the demographic transition together with the digital transition if we put people first and combining these collective behaviors of our regions together with the opportunities for decarbonization and the digital transition towards a new area of decentralized digital networks, which will dramatically change the way we have been able to look at the past. Okay. Last but not least, don't forget that this requires certainly, as Andrews and Dario mentioned, high-speed connections, but it will depend always on computing power, because the use of AI together with new observation methods, image and video-based, will require computing power. And that is the reason why the emerging structure of high-performance computing in Europe will be a critical element for the digitalization of our society and the economy in the years to come, to complement the cloud.
I'll come back on that issue in a little while, but Vice President Pavlova, you talked earlier about 40 to 45% of EIB financing towards cohesion objectives and 23% at least focused on least developed regions. What do you see as the key challenges here to ensure that we realize digitalization's full potential as an innovation enabler in those least developed regions, in those middle income regions that are caught somehow in this development trap? How do we really spur their innovation performance through digitalization?
Well, indeed, in order to achieve these ambitious targets, it's not only about setting targets, but really finding the right way and means to achieve those. So, as I said, we have thought about it, and our advisory team and our colleagues were working very hard to analyze what is the potential and what is the, let's say, the level of underinvestment. So what we have decided is, first of all, to expand our eligibilities with the special focus of, we call it diffusion of proven technologies. Because this is exactly what is missing especially in the less developed regions, in lower income regions. Really, we have excellent examples in more developed countries and regions. However, there is a complete lack. So whenever we see and we have, of course, value-added technology and a new technology applied somewhere in Europe, but still missing in less developed regions, we will consider this as a diffusion of proven technology, but also as an opportunity for less developed regions to catch up. So this is as part of our new eligibilities. Second element is definitely providing more broader variety of financial instruments which could be used, including because as a big multilateral financier, we do provide a lot of our support, especially for startups, innovators and SMEs through our intermediated lending, which of course will continue, and different financial instruments. However, what we have now envisaged is to provide much more direct lending to smaller and mid-sized companies in order to give them opportunity really to to develop faster and to have this more streamlined approach as well. We are, as part of Connecting Europe facility, we have, together with the European Commission, of course, established this Connecting Broadband Fund in order to support, because as we already heard, deployment of the the necessary infrastructure, rolling out of 5G technologies, high-speed capacity networks, etc., is of extreme importance. So this is where we pay also special attention, and this is how we directly address this and support this limitation of the digital divide. But another important element, because the infrastructure is not the only thing. Investing in skills, in people, like Minister said, this is an important element and important complementarity. So investing in skilling, upskilling is of extreme important. And our recent investment study shows that even companies having the necessary infrastructure, if they lack well-educated and skilled staff, it's a mission impossible. And what we can say that this is, in order to overcome this impediment, investments in also we realize that it's also providing basic digital skills. Okay. It's not only advanced, but basic digital skills is an important. And another important just element, the divide, the digital divide, is not only regional, but it's also across the whole spectrum, I should say, because really the digital transition and the investments in skills really require specific digital skills. So if we are not to widen the income inequality, we have to invest in the broad sense of variety of digital skills, starting from basic skills and then more specialized, tailor-made, as also Dario mentioned.
Andrew, I'll come to you in a moment because I want to talk about the role of cohesion policy and all of this. But Dario, on this issue of the skills of the digital divide, how do you see, you talked about the need to embrace these changes, to embrace distance learning, to embrace remote working. You said, but people are fearful. What for you is the key to addressing the fears, giving people the skills? How do you see the role of public policy in all of this generally? And then we can come more specifically to cohesion funding afterwards.
I see them pretty much like Andres Sut said, that the government should not be in the way of innovation. And that's, I think, the most important part. I see innovation, digital innovation, like a self-sustaining force that advances. It's very different, in my opinion, from the green transition. In the green transition, we have to find ways to change the habits of people. Nobody forced us to have these in our pockets, okay? But it could be the government policies, EU policies should maybe steer the innovation slightly to avoid some pitfalls, but mainly it's something that has to be free, has to be free to innovate. And one more thing I would like to add on this issue is that the digital skills that are needed, we cannot stress this enough. It's across a very broad spectrum, and we see now different kinds of divides, geographical divides, social divides, generational divides, all kind of them. And that's where I think public policies are most needed to help those left behind by this self-sustaining train that advances really fast. So let the train go, but look at everyone that is left behind and help them to get on the train. So this is, I think, the most important part. That
I want to bring Andrew in, but Minister Hayter, if you want a quick one.
Very quickly, and Andy, apologize for passing. I would like to bring this issue here, because if we look, for instance, at Human Development Report 2019, it is clear that there is a coexistence of convergence and divergence. In the other way, low-tech IT systems, like a mobile phone, has been able to approach everyone in the world. But the access to high-tech technology has become concentrated, and therefore, within the digital divide, there are an increasing inequality between those accessing low-tech and those access to high-tech. And that is the reason why I will also argue the importance of diversifying the capacity building, like systems like Dario mentioned, his company O'Clock and many others, but it is absolutely critical the role of public policies to incentivize the more traditional education, university-based education, and we need to learn to complement and to diversify different paths, particularly lifelong learning, where the traditional education, which will be completely critical, is complemented by different types of short-term education, either digitally or physically.
Okay, so we're talking here broadly about the role of public policy. Andrew, a comment to that, if you would, and also specifically, as you see it, to the role of cohesion policy in this area.
Well, I certainly agree with Minister Hector about many things he's saying, but particularly about the concentration of the frontier science and tech and the digital area, which worries us as well. But just maybe to keep you on track, Jackie, and to go to your specific question about the cohesion policy. We study science and technology policies writ large at the OECD, and I find that the EU cohesion policy is a very interesting one because it's not just one policy, it's a combination of different policies, some of which are regional, some of which are environmental or infrastructure, and the social fund. And what it does very nicely, I think, is it pairs kind of a top-down with the bottom-up of engaging the member states to co-finance a lot of these programs. And I think, to me, that makes a lot of sense. They then have a very strong incentive to implement. But what worries me a little bit, going back to our earlier conversation, is it puts a national frame on how this money is spent, which is understandable. It's taxpayers' euros, they're being spent. But this means it's sometimes maybe harder to scale up to a continental size, which is, I think, really what Europe needs to compete effectively against continental sizes, the United States and China. There's also another tension, which is within the cohesion funds, there's a kind of a short to medium term interest in protecting existing industries and with it employment in the region. And again, I come from part of the world that has seen a lot of this technological change and has suffered from it, and so I fully understand that. But it means that we need to balance protecting more mature sectors with then investing in the future. And so that's another inherent issue within the cohesion funds that we would point to.
Thank you very much indeed. Minister, by the way, if you do have any questions, either online, slido.com, #CohesionForum, or in the room, I'll be coming out to you very shortly. Minister, sort of reaction to this discussion about the role of public policy generally, but cohesion policy specifically, and some of the concerns that Andrew's raising there.
I want to look at the bright side. Let's put it this way.
I was going to say that was a very long pause.
Well, pauses are important. One example, I think, well, we will see what the outcome is, but giving a specific example of giving government support scheme for high-speed internet connection. So we have had 2 rounds in history. It worked somewhat. In other places didn't work at all. When I visit the country, many people say, look, I need a connection and there is nobody who is offering. And when you talk to some service providers or ITC companies who have been building the network, they are complaining that, look, we can't really build because there is no demand. So there is something lost in translation. So what we try now differently is that in the next round, we actually asked the municipalities, the local bodies, to identify which are the priority areas, either in terms of the villages or the smaller regions or in terms of the businesses. So who should get the connection first? And we didn't invent it in the ivory tower of a ministry, but we actually asked it from the field. We will get the proof very soon, say second half of this year. Does it help or does it not? But I think in terms of cohesion and particularly intra-region or internally, because also in Estonia, if I mentioned that we have GDP per capita north of 85% of the EU average, the capital city is well above 100. And then you have regions in the periphery which are well below 80. So there is clearly this difference. But again, what has helped or what COVID has pushed very strongly is that people, particularly younger people, they want to move out from the cities to the vicinity or to a countryside, particularly those who can work remotely. And that is precisely why I think this technological enabling is important also in cohesion policy.
Also raises the issue of connectivity important for the attractiveness of a region. Having that broadband access, having fast connectivity is going to be a crucial issue when we talk about brain drain from least developed regions. It's going to be absolutely central, isn't it?
But I think this is, I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon, because I think in many cities around the globe, or in many countries around the globe, you see the higher degree of urbanization.
Yeah.
What I observe now in Estonia is at least a bit of a demand for reverse urbanization. People want to go out of, I mean, we have lots of space. We are of the same size, just to put things into perspective. We are the same size as the Netherlands, and we have 15 times less people, or conversely, 15 times more square meters per capita. So there is plenty of space.